Why Big Auto hid. This study, how to use the $3 forbidden resin to restore dead paint. The hidden evidence. The question of whether degraded automotive paint could be genuinely restored rather than replaced was not, by the early 21st century, entirely absent from the scientific literature. It had simply migrated away from the trade publications of the automotive refinishing industry, where commercial interests shaped editorial priorities, and into the more insulated environment of academic and institutional research, where the criterion for publication was empirical validity rather than market utility. In university materials, science departments, and independent research institutes, chemists and polymer physicists were studying paint film degradation with tools and methodologies that had not existed in Ballner's time, and the conclusions they were reaching had a precise and uncomfortable relationship with what that Stuttgart laboratory had demonstrated a century earlier. The science was not new. The capacity to document it rigorously and the institutional distance from commercial pressure necessary to publish it honestly were what the early 21st century provided that the intervening decades had not. The study conducted at the University of Southern Mississippi in 2003 was among the most methodologically careful of these investigations, and its results were significant enough that their subsequent absence from mainstream automotive refinishing discourse requires deliberate explanation. The research team, working within the university's School of Polymers and High-Performance Materials, constructed a controlled experiment using 20 test panels prepared with standard automotive OEM paint systems, the same layered primer, base coat, and clear coat architecture used on production vehicles. Each panel was subjected to a standardized artificial weathering protocol using a xenon arc weatherometer, a device that simulates cumulative ultraviolet exposure, thermal cycling, and moisture condensation in an accelerated and precisely controlled sequence. The weathering protocol continued until each panel had reached a state of degradation equivalent, by established measurement standards, to approximately 4 to 6 years of average real-world outdoor exposure in a temperate climate. At this point, the panels were divided into treatment groups, some receiving commercially available wax and polished products of the type sold through automotive retailers, some receiving a capillary resin infiltration treatment prepared according to principles derived from the historical technical literature, and a control group receiving no treatment at all. The measurements that followed were taken using a combination of gloss meter readings, which quantify surface reflectivity on a standardized numerical scale, spectrophotometric color analysis, which measures the accuracy and saturation of surface color independent of gloss, and scanning electron microscopy of cross-sectioned panel samples, which allowed direct visual examination of the paint film structure at the microscopic level. The gloss meter is the most immediately interpretable of these instruments for non-specialist purposes. An undamaged, factory-fresh clear coat surface on a production vehicle typically reads between 85 and 95 gloss units on the standard 60-degree measurement scale. The artificially weathered panels, before any treatment, measured an average of 31 gloss units, consistent with the visibly dull, hazy appearance that characterizes neglected automotive paint in real-world conditions. The panels treated with commercial wax products showed an average gloss reading of 54 units immediately after treatment, a meaningful improvement attributable to the filling of surface microtexture with wax material and the smoothing effect this produced on light reflection. However, follow-up measurements at 4 weeks, 8 weeks, and 12 weeks showed progressive regression toward pre-treatment readings as the wax material degraded, was displaced by washing and environmental exposure, and ceased to fill the surface irregularities it had temporarily masked. At the 12-week measurement point, the wax-treated panels averaged 38 gloss units, only marginally above their pre-treatment condition. The wax had produced a real but entirely temporary visual improvement by coating the surface, rather than addressing the structural condition of the paint film beneath. When the coating was gone, the underlying degradation remained exactly as it had been. The panels treated with the capillary resin infiltration preparation showed a different pattern entirely. Immediately after treatment, their average gloss reading was 79 units, substantially higher than the wax-treated panels, and within the range of moderately used factory finish paintwork. More significantly, the follow-up measurement schedule told a different story from the wax panels. At 4 weeks, the infiltration-treated panels measured 77 units. At 12 weeks, 76. At 6 months, 74. At 18 months, 71. At the final measurement point recorded in the published study, 36 months after the single treatment application, the panels averaged 68 gloss units, more than double their pre-treatment condition, and representing a gloss retention figure of 87% relative to the immediately post-treatment reading. The improvement was not a coating that wore away. It was a structural change in the paint film that persisted because the chemistry that had produced it was integrated into the film's molecular architecture rather than sitting on top of it. The cross-linked resin network that had formed inside the fracture channels of the clear coat was not going anywhere because it had become, chemically speaking, part of the clear coat itself. The scanning electron microscopy images included in the published study provided the visual evidence that the numerical data implied. Cross-sections of the weathered, untreated control panels showed the fracture network in the clear coat layer with clarity. Irregular channels running through the polymer matrix, their walls rough and chemically altered by oxidation, their openings at the surface visible as the microscopic roughness that scattered light and produced the characteristic dull appearance. Cross-sections of the infiltration-treated panels showed the same fracture locations filled with consolidated resin material, the channels bridged and sealed, the surface profile smoother and more uniform at the microscopic scale in a way that corresponded directly with the improved macroscopic gloss readings. The mechanism Ballner had inferred from observation in 1903, without access to any of these imaging tools, was confirmed in precise structural detail a century later by equipment he could not have imagined. 6 years after the Mississippi study, the Fraunhofer Institute for Surface Engineering and Thin Films in Germany published results from a substantially larger investigation with more direct commercial implications. The Fraunhofer Institute occupies a particular position in the European research landscape. It is applied rather than purely academic, oriented toward industrially relevant problems, and carries institutional credibility that makes its published findings difficult to dismiss as theoretical. The 2009 study involved a fleet of 240 commercial vehicles operated by a logistics company in Bavaria, ranging from delivery vans to light trucks, all of which had been in continuous outdoor service for periods between 3 and 7 years, and all of which showed varying degrees of paint film degradation across their surface areas. The scale of this study addressed one of the limitations of laboratory panel experiments. It tested the treatment under actual operational conditions on vehicles that would continue to be used in real-world environments after treatment, exposed to actual weather, washing cycles, and the mechanical abrasion of normal service. The infiltration treatment was applied by a team of technicians using a standardized protocol, with the entire fleet of 240 vehicles processed over a period of several weeks. Material costs for the resin preparation and application supplies were carefully tracked and came to an average of $16 per vehicle, a figure that included all consumables and was calculated to be replicable at scale under commercial operating conditions. The treated fleet was then monitored over a 30-month follow-up period, with standardized gloss and color measurements taken at regular intervals alongside visual condition assessments. The results tracked closely with the Mississippi laboratory findings. Average gloss recovery across the fleet was in the range of 80 to 84% of pre-degradation factory values. The improvement showed strong retention through the follow-up period, and the cost-benefit analysis against the alternative of professional respray work, which the logistics company had been scheduling for the most degraded vehicles at an average cost of between $800 and $1,200 per vehicle, was unambiguous. The infiltration treatment, at $16 per vehicle, delivered a durable restoration that deferred respraying indefinitely for the majority of treated vehicles in the follow-up period. What makes the trajectory of these studies instructive is not their content, but their reception. Neither the Mississippi findings nor the Fraunhofer results were obscure or inaccessible. Both were published in peer-reviewed journals available to anyone in the automotive or coatings industry with standard library access. Both were presented at professional conferences. Neither generated any meaningful response from the automotive refinishing trade, its associated industry publications, or the major paint manufacturers whose products serve that market. The silence was not passive. Trade publications that covered every minor development in wax chemistry, every new spray application technology, and every regulatory change affecting paint materials found nothing to report in 2 rigorously conducted studies, demonstrating that a significant portion of their industry's revenue base rested on the commercial suppression of a viable alternative. The designed failure of the products that dominate the consumer automotive care market, waxes formulated to last 4 to 6 weeks, silicone-based spray detailers that provide a few days of enhanced gloss before breaking down completely, polymer sealants marketed with impressive-sounding chemistry that nevertheless address only the surface rather than the film, is not incidental to the economics of that market. It is foundational to them. A product that works permanently applied once at $16 per vehicle does not generate the repeat purchase cycle that sustains a multi-billion-dollar consumer products category. The studies existed. The industry simply had no mechanism and no incentive for hearing what they said. The $3 rebellion. The distance between what the automotive refinishing industry sells and what automotive paint actually needs turns out to be measurable in very precise terms. It is the difference between a product engineered to address the surface of a degraded paint film and a product capable of penetrating the film's internal structure. It is the difference between a temporary cosmetic improvement and a durable chemical restoration. And in practical terms, as it exists in the contemporary consumer market, it is approximately the difference between $40 spent on a branded automotive wax at a retail chain and $3 spent on a small bottle of acrylic copolymer resin concrete sealer at a hardware store. The product that can do what the expensive one cannot is sitting on a shelf between the masonry supplies and the waterproofing compounds, labeled for an entirely different application, carrying no automotive marketing claims whatsoever, and priced at a level that makes the economics of the refinishing industry's alternative look not merely unnecessary, but frankly absurd. The active ingredient that matters is acrylic copolymer resin, and identifying it requires only a few minutes with the label of any concrete or masonry sealer product at a hardware retailer. The label will list the active chemistry in the ingredients or composition section, and what one is looking for is a water-based acrylic copolymer formulation with a solids content in the range of 15 to 25%, high enough to deposit meaningful resin material inside the fracture network of a degraded clear coat, but sufficiently diluted in its aqueous carrier to achieve the surface tension characteristics that allow capillary penetration. Products marketed for sealing concrete driveways, masonry walls, or poured floor surfaces meet these specifications, because the engineering requirements of concrete sealing are, at the molecular scale, remarkably similar to those of paint film restoration. Concrete is also a porous matrix through which liquid must penetrate to deliver a consolidating chemistry to internal surfaces. The acrylic copolymer resin that accomplishes this in concrete accomplishes the same thing in a fractured automotive clear coat by identical physical and chemical mechanisms. The label will not say this. The product was not designed with automotive paint in mind, but the chemistry does not require a designer's intention to function according to its properties. What one should not look for is equally important. Products containing silicone compounds, petroleum distillates as primary carriers, or wax-based additives should be avoided, as these will either sit on the surface without penetrating, interfere with the capillary action that the treatment depends upon, or deposit materials that complicate any future professional refinishing work if that eventually becomes necessary. A clean, water-based acrylic copolymer sealer in the specified solids range with no silicone or wax additives is the target. It will be, in most hardware retail environments, one of the least expensive and least visually prominent products in the building materials section. It will not be on an end cap display. It will not have an aspirational name or a photograph of a gleaming sports car on its label. It will look exactly like what it is, a utilitarian masonry product, and it will cost approximately $3 for a quantity sufficient to treat an entire vehicle. The procedure begins with washing, and the washing stage is more important than it might appear. The purpose is not merely to remove visible surface dirt. It is to clear the openings of the fracture network in the clear coat from any contamination that would physically obstruct capillary penetration. Road film, atmospheric deposits, and the residue of previously applied wax or silicone products can partially or completely seal fracture openings at the surface, preventing the resin solution from finding its entry points. A thorough wash with standard dish soap, not automotive shampoo, which typically contains conditioning agents that leave a residue, but plain dish soap of the type used for hand-washing kitchen items, applied with a clean cloth or soft brush and rinsed completely, is sufficient to achieve this. The vehicle should then be allowed to dry completely before any treatment is applied. Any remaining moisture in the fracture network will compete with the resin solution for the available capillary channels, reducing penetration depth and therefore the completeness of restoration. In practical terms, washing in the morning and treating in the afternoon of a dry day, or allowing an overnight drying period, meets this requirement reliably. The application itself is performed with a foam applicator pad, the type sold for applying polish or compound, available at any automotive retailer for minimal cost, or substituted with a piece of clean, fine cell foam cut from household packaging material. A small quantity of the resin solution, approximately the volume of a tablespoon, is applied to the pad. The pad is then pressed against the paint surface with moderate, even pressure and moved in overlapping circular motions across each panel section. The pressure matters. It is not a wiping motion, but a pressing motion. The objective is to push the solution into contact with the fracture openings rather than to spread it across the surface in the manner of a wax application. Each section of approximately 30 centimeters square should receive 30 to 45 seconds of this treatment before moving to the adjacent section. The solution will appear to absorb into the surface rather than sitting on top of it. This is the capillary process working as intended, and it is the visual confirmation that the product chemistry is correct and the surface preparation was adequate. One works across the vehicle systematically. Hood first, then each fender, then door panels, then rear quarter panels and trunk or tailgate, maintaining a consistent application technique across all surfaces. On areas of severe degradation where the paint has lost the most color depth and gloss, a second pass with a fresh application of solution immediately following the first is beneficial, as the initial application may not have fully saturated the deeper fracture network in those areas. On areas of lighter weathering, a single pass is typically sufficient. The total material consumption for an average-sized sedan is well within the capacity of a single small bottle. The application process for a complete vehicle, working at a careful and unhurried pace, takes between 60 and 90 minutes. What happens in the following 48 hours is the curing process, and it is the period during which the molecular chemistry that makes this treatment durable rather than temporary takes place. As the aqueous carrier evaporates from the fracture channels, progressively from the surface inward as surface moisture leaves first, the acrylic copolymer chains are left behind in the confined space of the channels at increasing concentration. The cross-linking process, in which adjacent polymer chains form chemical bonds with each other and with the existing clear coat chemistry at the fracture walls, accelerates as concentration increases and as the material reaches its glass transition threshold. By the end of 48 hours, at typical ambient temperatures, the cross-linking reaction is substantially complete, and the resin network inside the fractures has become a permanent structural feature of the paint film. The vehicle should not be washed during this period, as water introduced to the fracture network before the carrier has fully evaporated will dilute the resin concentration and reduce cross-linking density. After 48 hours, normal washing and use can resume without any effect on the treatment. The results documented in individual cases have a consistency that reflects the underlying science rather than coincidence. A 1986 Corvette in Ohio, its original medium red paint oxidized over decades of outdoor storage to a surface that appeared almost pink in direct sunlight, was treated by its owner using this procedure after the vehicle was retrieved from a barn where it had sat largely unprotected for 11 years. The owner documented the process with photographs taken before treatment, immediately after, and at intervals over the following 2 years. The before photographs show a surface with the characteristic chalky flatness of severely weathered paint, the color depth almost entirely absent, the surface scattering light evenly rather than reflecting it directionally. The immediately post-treatment photographs show a surface that, in the owner's own description, he had not believed was possible without a complete respray. The red had returned, not approximately, not partially, but in the full saturated depth that the original factory finish had possessed. The 2-year follow-up photographs show no meaningful regression from the immediately post-treatment condition. A schoolteacher in Michigan treated her 2001 Ford Explorer after a body shop had quoted her $4,000 for a full respray of the vehicle's clear coat, which had failed extensively across the hood, roof, and upper door panels. In the pattern characteristic of delamination adjacent weathering damage in that generation of Ford paint systems, she applied the treatment herself over a Saturday afternoon, using materials that cost her, in total, under $10, including the foam applicator pads. Her account of the moment she stepped back from the completed application describes something that felt, in her words, less like completing a household task and more like watching something be given back that had been taken. The color came up through the haze the way she remembered it looking when the vehicle was new. She drove it for another 4 years without respraying. The knowledge that makes this possible has been available in various forms since a chemist in Stuttgart pressed a resin-soaked cotton cloth against a locomotive panel in the spring of 1903 and watched the color return. It was documented in a journal that sat in an archive for most of a century. It was confirmed by university researchers and institutional scientists whose findings were published and then professionally ignored. It exists now in the gap between what is sold to people who own vehicles with aging paint and what those people's paint actually requires. Sharing this knowledge is the only mechanism by which the commercial silence around it is broken. Not through any institutional channel, because no institution with a financial interest in the refinishing industry will carry it, but through the direct transmission of one person telling another what they found and what it did. The vault, as it were, has always been unlocked. It required only someone willing to go looking and then willing to say what they found.